It's dangerous to go alone. Wow. Remember when this was the best storytelling video games had to offer? Now, don't get me wrong, I like Old Men in Caves just as much as the next guy, but I'm very glad to see the narrative transformation video games have undergone in the intervening decades between then and now. We've got proper writers creating touching stories about the human condition, fantastic comedies, political epics, the works, all rendered in evocative high definition with sweeping orchestral scores. But as much as it pains me to say, we're not quite there yet. Whilst video games are able to much more consistently nail the fundamentals of a good story, we're running into another, much trickier issue. What is it exactly that makes a story told in video game form different from one on the big screen, small screen, or a paper screen? This is crucial to know, because each storytelling medium has distinct advantages and disadvantages. For example, in the case of cinema, it's the ability to show huge amounts of audiovisual information at once and have the viewer be able to absorb it passively. Like how every scene in Alien is packed with subtle thematic cues that you won't even notice your first time around. Seriously, watch this movie and this time take a drink whenever you spot something that looks like a dick. You will be out cold by the halfway mark. That brings up the question then, what is it that sets video game storytelling apart? Well, the obvious answer would be the fact that they're interactive, right? In video games, you are the hero. You get to decide what happens. That's the driving force that makes classic games like Mass Effect, The Witcher, and Lee Carvalho's putting challenge work so well, right? Or is it? Because there are plenty of brilliant games that know how to tell a good story without really giving you much of a say at all. Thomas Was Alone is a fantastic light puzzle platformer that tells the surprisingly emotional and character-driven story of a bunch of virtual rectangles. The story Thomas Was Alone tells has no choices, is entirely linear and never really addresses the player, but it's still something that, somehow, would only really work in video game form.
What if there was some kind of inverted form? Some way to... what's the word? Jump.
Why is that? Well, the answer to that particular question is very simple. Verisimilitude. Now, if you don't know what that word means and suspect it's very pretentious and only used by arseholes like myself, then give yourself a pat on the back because you are right on the money, well done. Verisimilitude, simply put, is the impression of being true, or real. And I'd argue it's a unique quality that only really applies to video game narratives, because in no other medium is the audience a key component in how the story gets told. Without you watching, Luke's still gonna blow up the Death Star, but Mario's not going anywhere unless you make him. The player is who's responsible for driving things forwards, for putting in the effort to make the story happen, and in that way you kind of become a part of it, making the game seem much more real than a movie could ever be. That is verisimilitude. The key to a good video game story isn't necessarily in letting players choose the direction of it, but in allowing them to become a part of it. It's why people rightfully disliked Final Fantasy XIII for essentially being one giant cutscene corridor, but really liked A Way Out. In the latter, your cooperation and skill is responsible for pushing the story forwards, despite the fact that you still have zero input on how it plays out. There are a million different ways to incorporate this unique bond people form with interactive media, but a good way to start would be to exploit people's natural tendency to create characters and stories out of as little as a few lines of code. Pac-Man's ghosts are one of the most iconic gaming baddies for a very good reason. They all seem to have unique personalities. Blinky, the red guy, aggressively homes in on you. Inky, the blue ghost, flanks from the sides. Pinky, the green one, tries to get in front of you and cut you off. And Clyde, the orange ghost, doesn't even go for you at all. He'll close in and then retreat away from you once he gets too close. See how just by changing how each ghost attacks you, they've been instilled with this crucial element of personality that brings the game to life. Certain players might have a particular ghost that counters their strategy, creating a bit of a rivalry, and the fact that they each close in from different directions, behind, in front, and the sides, gives the impression that three of them are working together to take you down, and Clyde is just kinda there for moral support. Classic Clyde. More modern games use the same tricks to create stories with no actual writing, but loads of narrative potential, like Derek Hughes' Spelunky, which he talks about in the book of the same name. He says, unlike fanfiction, where the audience is creating stories based on their favourite worlds, game players are living in them. And in the context of these stories, the random number generator is akin to fate, setting up scenarios that at times seem too incredible to be anything but scripted. Let's see how this plays out in practice. We set the scene in the jungle, in a special spooky undead level, which are always full of loot. That means, in classic form, I got too greedy. I sacrificed this cute pug to get a free cape, went grave robbing for a fancy shotgun, and explored the map for even more goodies. Things were going well. Then I realised that my time in the level before the mega spooky ghost spawned was nearly up, and went into panic mode. I had these boxes left to get, this vampire dude to kill, and this big catacomb to raid. What followed was a panicked run and gun looting spree where I wasted even more time getting a duplicate cape and 2 worthless machetes while just barely managing to raid the catacomb and make off with the precious crystal skull within, narrowly avoiding a nasty spooking from the ghost. The whole experience felt like an actual story. There were stakes, peril, and several memorable moments. But this was nothing more than Spelunky's systems working as intended. However, when they get combined with the player's input, they become characters in an improvised story that's one of a kind. Games are just as much emotional simulations as they are mathematical ones. Simply by playing a game, you're at least partially invested in it. The trick is in using mechanics to convey interesting experiences in interesting ways and to deepen that bond between the player's brain and what's going on in the game. In Hitman, pulling off the perfect, intricately timed kill and getting that sweet rush of endorphins as you stroll out of the ensuing carnage tells you all you need to know about Agent 47 and his chosen line of work. The game doesn't train you to be a master assassin, but it sure as hell does let you know what being one feels like. Another great recent example will be the best mission in Thronebreaker, a single player version of CD Projekt's Gwent. A pretty mild spoiler warning for a mid-game side quest, by the way. In this side quest, you get to fight a dragon. And somehow Gwent, a card game, manages to make you feel just as outgunned, panicked, and eventually triumphant as a much more naturalistic game like Monster Hunter. The dragon sets fire to your lines, swoops in for the kill to eat 2 of your dudes at once before backing off to recover, giving the fight this awesome feeling of back and forth as you slowly chip it down. The fight requires a mix of offense and defense, as well as some clever thinking to eventually kill, just like a real adrenaline pumping boss fight. But how does Thronebreaker achieve this with just turn-based cards? Simple systems that evoke not the reality but the feeling of what they're trying to convey can be surprisingly effective. Darkest Dungeon's sanity system isn't exactly a nuanced portrayal of mental health, but it wonderfully captures that slow Lovecraftian slide into insanity and self-abuse. The health system, complete with its gambling death doors system, ignites that faint spark of hope, that you can win, that the darkness can be pushed back. That is, of course, before you die to a skeleton, splashing you with one too many cups of sad juice. Thronebreaker's dragon isn't realistic, but it does instill those same feelings of intimidation and panic as it unpredictably moves around, tears into formation and shrugs off damage you throw at it, all whilst being way more powerful than any card you could ever hope to have access to, further ratcheting up the idea that this thing is a big deal, even if the mission itself is actually kind of easy. The worst thing a game can do if it wants to create a good story is to make you not care, to lose that crucial sense of investment. Which is why realism, counterintuitively, is often a one-way ticket to a bored, disconnected player. Durability mechanics and hunger and thirst systems might be realistic, but unless your game is focused on these ideas, they often become an annoyance, distracting you from the game. If a player isn't playing their part as the engine that drives the story, then the game doesn't really work. This is the reason why games insist on slapping in quick time events and those weird button-holdy bits into what would otherwise be cutscenes. They're to maintain that bond and ensure that you don't lose interest, particularly in important scenes. Those weird dialogue options where they all lead to the same response are another example of this phenomena. By giving you a chance to affect the story even a little bit and to make a choice that reflects your personality, you become more invested in what happens. They're simple tricks really, but imagine how much more boring Phoenix Wright would be if it was literally a zero input straight path through the story without the dialogue options or chances to get things wrong, even if those things never really ended up changing the plot. Oh, wait, they made an anime about it? Oh, looks like you don't have to imagine, just go and watch that and then probably fall asleep. Video games aren't just interactive, they're collaborative. A story you and the developer team up to tell, and far too often I think people on both sides of that exchange forget that, and miss out on creating some truly unique experiences that can't be replicated anywhere else. Which at last brings me onto the game that inspired this whole video, Return of the Obra Dinn. What a game. And one that proves without a shadow of a doubt that when players make the story happen, we can create something really cool. Return of the Obra Dinn sees you playing an insurance investigator trying to figure out how much compensation needs to be dished out to the families of some dead sailors. Sounds pretty boring, right? Well, what if I told you that this game was developed by Lucas Pope, developer of Papers, Please, and the man who managed to turn checking passports into a tense political thriller. The story sees you figuring out what happened to the Obra Dinn, an all but empty ship that unexpectedly arrives at port 5 years after it was declared missing. The ship is filled with sun-bleached corpses and the spectre of something truly horrible. Luckily, you have access to a ledger of the crew, a picture of everyone aboard, and a magic watch that can show you the exact moment of people's deaths. The game is essentially a giant logic puzzle, with you attempting to match up faces to names to causes of death in an effort to identify everyone. But the real genius of the Obra Dinn is how this story unfolds. See, everything of interest has already happened, but you get to discover and unravel the intricate lives and deaths of the Obra Dinn's crew, and in doing so, make the story your own. Some moderate spoilers for the fates of some side characters, though not the solution to their respective puzzles. If you want to play the game totally blind, then skip ahead to this timestamp. One of my most memorable moments in the game was in tracking the adventures of this guy with the circle tattoos. He pops up basically everywhere. Here he is working on the rigging, here he is fighting a monster, and here he is getting torn apart by a kraken. The dude gets around, which was super frustrating during my first few hours with the game, as it makes him almost impossible to identify without out-of-game knowledge. But my dogged attempts to identify the guy made me form a bit of a bond with him. He was mysterious, elusive, but also kind of the unsung hero of the crew who deserved to be remembered. He was my white whale of the Obra Dinn. Mr. Jack of all trades isn't the only guy I felt connection with. There's this gullible Italian dude who gets shanked, Brennan, who's always getting caught up in zany adventures, and who has appeared 3 times in this footage so far. All of these characters have nothing but a few still vignettes, and most don't even get a voice line, but simply by uncovering and bringing their story to life, we're able to turn a face, a name and a cause of death into a fully fledged personality. By the time you're done in Return of the Obra Dinn, I have no doubt you'll have remembered an interesting detail or fun moment about more than half of its 60 strong cast, despite the fact that most of them die without ceremony and don't have a single spoken line. That is the strength of video games. They connect you to the story, and in doing so, make it feel better than real. So what can we learn from this as people who play and enjoy video games? Well, I think the most important takeaway is to learn to approach games on their own terms. Though they are interactive media, games need to be tackled from the right perspective, with the right frame of mind. If we play Mass Effect expecting to decide the fate of the galaxy, then we'll end up fighting the game because that's just not what it offers. But if we allow ourselves to settle into a campy, character-focused space opera that we can sometimes change the texture of, we'll have a much more fun time. Same with games with less of a strict narrative focus. If you spend all of your time expecting a certain kind of experience, you'll have trouble appreciating what the game is trying to do. I had exactly that experience with Return of the Obra Dinn. I expected a puzzle game and had a pretty miserable time until I realised that it was much more focused on organic exploration than it was on actually challenging your brain. The question of if games are art is, as far as I'm concerned, a bit of a foregone conclusion, but we're still very much in the process of figuring out how games are art. And it's only by experimenting with the form and doing as many weird and interesting things as we can within the limits of the video gaming medium that we can one day approach that zenith of artistic achievement, the greatest work of fiction ever penned. I'm talking of course about National Treasure 2 starring Nicolas Cage. But that's a story for another time. Hello and thanks for watching. If you'd like to take a look at the script for this video, I've as of right now started putting them in the description for those of you who can't be bothered to watch, but did anyway? Shit. Alright, I've not really thought that through, but anyway, this video, like all the other nonsense on this channel, is supported in part by you guys. And as is financially motivated tradition, here's a list of my top tier supporters. Samuel Vanderplatz, Alex Deloche, Lunar Eagle 1996, Jonathan Kirkinson, Strateger in Ultima, Patrick Romberg, Brian Notariani, William Johansson, Lucas Slack, Joshua Binswanger, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Asaran, Baxter Heel, Ray's Dad, Daniel Metges, James Lamont, and Chow. Thank you to those guys, thank you to all my other patrons, and a Merry Novemberness thank you to you for watching as well. See ya!